Venture capital, you've heard the stories, right? Legendary investors, insane returns, founders who literally change the world. But behind all the headlines and those billion-dollar valuations, there's a core secret, a fundamental truth that explains how the entire game is really played.
And this is the story we all get told. It's the one about visionary genius. An investor sees a little spark in a company like Snap, they write a check, and bam, a $2 billion return. It all builds up this myth of the VC as a kind of kingmaker, someone with this almost supernatural power to see the future. So it makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, if they're generating these kinds of legendary returns, they must be way better at picking winners than anybody else. But is that really what's going on here? Well, the surprising answer is a hard no. The secret isn't about being better at picking winners. Actually, the data shows that even the absolute best venture capitalists can't do that reliably. The real strategy is something else entirely, and it's way more counterintuitive than you'd think.
And boom, here it is. This is just a stunning admission from Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, one of the most successful startup machines on the planet. He's saying that financially, only one company in each huge batch of startups actually moves the needle on their returns. The rest? They're basically just the cost of doing business. This is the key to the whole puzzle. So how is that even possible? How can that be true? Well, it's because the world of startup investing, it just doesn't play by the same rules as our normal, everyday world. It operates in a strange universe that's governed by a mathematical principle called a power law.
Okay, so let's break this down. Think about two totally different worlds. On one hand, you've got the normal world. This is the classic bell curve. It's how things like human height work. Most of us are clustered around an average, and someone who's, 8 feet tall is incredibly rare. But the venture world? Whoa, that's a whole different beast. There's no real average. It's a power law world where a tiny number of massive events, like a huge earthquake, account for almost all of the total effect. And that's exactly where startups live.
And this is the absolute key. In a power law distribution, you've got this handful of grand slam home runs that don't just help the returns. For all practical purposes, they are the returns. Everything else, it's pretty much just a rounding error.
And look, the raw numbers here are just wild. They prove it. A tiny sliver, just 4.5% of the investments made by the best funds are generating 60% of all their profits. That means over 95% of their deals, all that work is basically just fighting for scraps. It's an unbelievably skewed reality.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, fine, I get it. Just find the few massive winners. Easy, right? Well, here's the next twist in the story. The biggest, most successful investments often look like terrible ideas when they first start out.
Investor Peter Thiel has this brilliant way of thinking about it. The real magic, the real money, isn't in ideas that seem obviously good to everyone. Because if they were, there'd already be huge companies doing them. The gold is in that tiny, tiny overlap. Ideas that look like a bad idea to almost everybody, but are actually secretly a stroke of genius.
I mean, just think about Facebook in the early days. It's the perfect example. Paul Graham talks about what it sounded like. A website for a tiny little niche market. Just college students. It had zero revenue model. And what was it for? Wasting time. On paper, it sounded like the worst idea ever. And that's exactly why it had a shot at being so huge. So let's put this all together. You're in a power law world. You know the biggest winners are going to look like terrible ideas at first. So what's your strategy? You can't play it safe. It's just not an option. The only thing that makes sense is to swing for the fences. Every single time.
And this brings us to what folks in VC call the Babe Ruth effect. Babe Ruth wasn't just a home run king. He was famous for striking out. A lot. For decades, he held the strikeout record. The best VCs, they play the exact same way.
And the data backs this up completely. When you stack up good funds against great funds, what do you see? Well, the great funds, they hit way more home runs. We're talking investments that return more than 10 times the cash you put in. No big surprise there, right? They hit big. But here's the part that blows your mind. Those exact same great funds, they also have more investments that completely tank, that go to zero. They don't just hit big, they miss big. It proves they're not better pickers. They're just taking bigger swings.
Okay, so this is all great in theory. Power laws, bad ideas, Babe Ruth. But what does this actually mean when you're writing million-dollar checks? How does this actually shape investment decisions in the real world?
All right, let's look at a real-world headache that famed investor Fred Wilson pointed out. He saw this trend of brand new baby startups raising money at a whopping $100 million valuation. And he knew, with the unforgiving math of the power law, this was a huge problem.
So here's the napkin math he did. Let's say you have a $100 million fund and you make 100 bets. Simple enough. But because that valuation is so high at $100 million, your $1 million check only buys you 1% of the company. Now, let's be super generous. Let's say your absolute best investment, your number one pick, becomes a monster, a $10 billion success.
So what's the result? The fund barely returns its own capital, a 1.33x return, and that's before you pay any fees. I mean, just let that sink in. You hit a $10 billion grand slam, a once-in-a-decade winner, and because you paid too much at the start, you can't even generate a proper venture return. The math just doesn't lie. So if paying crazy high valuations is a trap, what's the answer? It comes down to portfolio size. The logic is actually pretty straightforward. You have to accept most of your bets will fail. You have to understand that only one or two outliers are going to make all your money back and then some. So what's the conclusion? You have to make enough bets, say 50 or more, just to have a statistical shot at finding one of those outliers. The goal isn't to avoid failure. It's to make sure you have a ticket to the lottery when that black swan company finally shows up.
And this all leads to a really profound takeaway. Paul Graham puts it perfectly. He says to succeed in this world, you have to be like a pilot flying through thick clouds. Your gut, your intuition, might be screaming that you're flying straight and level, but your instruments are telling you you're actually in a death spiral. You have to learn to turn your gut off and trust the instruments, the cold, hard, counterintuitive math of the power law.
So what's venture capital's biggest secret? It's that the job isn't about being some kind of magical picker of winners. It's about being an architect, a disciplined architect of a portfolio that is built from the ground up to capture those incredibly rare, extreme, world-changing home runs. And that really leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. If the rule in this world is that massive, repeated failure is a requirement for breakthrough success, then how should that make us rethink our own relationship with risk?